Let me know, Sheldon. Okay, I see we're streaming live now. Okay. I will share my screen here with everybody. We have 2 agenda items. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
2 agenda items this evening. The first is we have John Rinkowitz with us from Minkel Metzger Bar and Company, and he's here to review the results of our external annual audit that was completed for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2020. And then when John is done, we will then move on to review the claims audit exception reports for the period of July to September 2020. What I will do right now is I will turn it over to John. I'm going to share my screen here. Just flip over to here. This is the executive summary that John and his firm created for us this evening. So John, I will turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Great. Good evening, everyone. So the executive summary, so you should have had a chance to see the financial statements at this point. The executive summary is kind of a much shorter, much more condensed version of the financial statements that we find it's a little easier to go through rather than 50 some odd pages of statements and notes. This is just more of a condensed, more focused document. So if we can go to page 1, which is the balance sheet for the general fund. Okay. And so this is the general fund, which is the main operating fund for Boces. And you can see at the top here, and we have comparative amounts. So you can see what where you finished the current year as compared to where you were at the end of last year. And up at the top here, we have your assets, which is, you know, the items you have, cash and receivables. So those amounts that you're owed that you haven't collected yet. Down below that, liabilities. So these are just amounts that are owed still. So expenses that you've incurred that haven't paid out yet. Included in here, amounts due to the retirement systems. Also the state aid due to the districts. So so the aid that's supposed to come in and then be paid out for the districts. Also down here, due to school districts, and Melanie, if you could just scroll up a little bit. So you'll notice up at the top in the assets section, you have the same number this year compared to last year. And just what that is that's actually the net amount of what the Boces is owed from school districts and the amounts that you owe back to school districts. So as you're aware, Boces doesn't get to keep any surplus monies. So when you generate a surplus, your revenues are higher than your expenses, you pay that money back to your districts. And there's a balance between what the districts still owe you compared to what you owe back to the districts for that surplus. Last year, you can see that your receivables actually were higher than your amount you owed back. So that's why you see 900,000 in the asset section. And then down in the liabilities this year, because the surplus is up a little bit higher, but also you collected more than you billed out this year. So it's actually a liability this year. And that's really just a placement and the timing of how those numbers worked out this year. Okay, as we scroll down to the bottom of the page here, so what we have here are your fund balances. So your restricted section, these are legally established reserves. So under general municipal law and New York ed law, you're allowed to set some monies aside in these reserves for very specific purposes. And this is helping Boces with your budgeting and how you plan to in the future to meet certain needs and expenses. Okay, so this Boces does a real good job with this, and you've set some money as aside. You also have a really good process here where the board actually approves these reserves every year and the funding levels. And that's a great process because it really demonstrates that the board is involved in how these reserves are established, their use, their budgeting moving forward, and accepting what the levels are at. And that's a very positive thing. When we talk to boards for school districts and for Boces, we really talk about making sure that you are managing these reserves, that you have a plan for how they're being spent. And I know Clark and Melanie have come up with a plan and how these will be spent, and paying attention to the needs of your component districts and making sure that you're addressing those and how these are being spent. So that's very positive, very good things in the way these are being managed. In the assigned fund balance section here, just to show OPEB, okay, other post-employment benefits. So as you may recall, this is the retiree health. So several years back, Boces actually set some money aside because you were required to put a liability on your books for retiree health, and we'll actually talk about that a little later. And so Boces set some money aside, which is a responsible thing to do. But however, because there's no mechanism to allow you to actually do that in the state's opinion, and based on the state's recommendation to Boces, you decided to return those funds to the districts. But rather than doing that in a one-shot payment back to the districts, you've done that systematically over a number of years, which allows the districts to be able to handle those monies coming back. Okay, and then this last year, you actually completed that process, and all those funds have been returned as a matter of your budgeting process. So that's very positive. It was a very good way of handling those funds and making sure that you're meeting the needs of your districts. Okay, so your fund balances and your reserves, so you have these available for your future needs and budgeting practices, and you have plans in place on how these will be used. And again, that's all very appropriate, and the Boces is in a good financial position because of this at year end. Okay. And we talked a little bit about surpluses generated this year. And so if we scroll to the next page, this is your revenues comparing budget to actual. And we have 2 years worth of these comparative. And it just shows compared to how you budgeted and what your revenues were compared to those budgets. You can see that your revenues are a little bit higher than budget, and that's consistent year to year. If we go to the next page, okay, these are your expenses compared to your budget. And we can stay at the top here just to show. So we talked about your surpluses. So generating surpluses when your revenues are higher than your expenses. So we have a little calculation here that kind of demonstrates that. So that surplus we saw on the last page, so your budget to actual of your revenue, your budget to actual of your expenses, here's your surplus revenue over expenses. Okay, and that just shows you how that surplus is calculated. And as you know, so that those funds will be returned to the districts, and it's actually made up of two pieces, the surplus for 5.2 and the E-rate for $1 million. That surplus is up about $1.5 million compared to last year. A lot of that is due to some reduced costs that you had this year because of the shutdown. So you didn't incur as much expense in areas such as utilities. There were no field trips during the spring. Substitutes weren't being used, those sort of things. So because you didn't have those expenses, you didn't incur those costs. Okay, and that's where that variance comes from. And we can look at last year's is below that, and you can see, again, the surplus is up a little bit this year compared to last year. Okay. Moving forward, so special aid fund. So these are some of your other funds that you have. The special aid fund includes your continuing ed programs, and we can see that the fund had an overall loss again this year. And we mentioned this in our internal control communication regarding some of the continuing ed programs which are running deficits. And we know you're monitoring those and continue to monitor those. We know that, you know, because of the shutdown, there was some difficulty this year and classes that weren't held, and so it was difficult to generate revenues, but continue to monitor those. Below that is the capital projects. So you have a project that's fully funded, and as that project continues to run, you'll see that fund balance drop off as the monies are spent. So that's just an ongoing project. Okay. The next page, this is your entity-wide balance sheet. So this is what GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, requires that you present this, what we call a corporate balance sheet. And it's really kind of just takes all of your funds and squishes them down into one fund, but adds a couple things that aren't presented elsewhere in the report. So we're adding in your capital assets, your land, your buildings, into the assets section. If we scroll down a little bit into liabilities here, you see long-term obligations. So any debt that the Boces carries, but also your liabilities to the pension systems, which the, again, Governmental Accounting Standards Boards requires you to present. And as we mentioned earlier, your retirement health liabilities. So the Boces provides some health insurance to its retirees, and as a result, you're required to put the liability for the value of those benefits. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, Melanie, we show that broken out just because that's by far the largest liability you have on this balance sheet. And again, kind of think of it in a real basic manner. If Boces were to shut its doors today, what would you have to have set aside to be able to pay for the value of the benefits to your retirees? So that's kind of what that is. You have an actuary that helps you come up with that number. And you can see the size of it and where it kind of impacts your balance sheet the most. You can see in your unrestricted section here for net position, you've got this negative number. And really, it's because of the impact of this retiree health liability. And as we talked about earlier, you're not allowed to start funding that. So you're really stuck kind of carrying this liability on your books and having it impact your bottom line without really being able to start setting aside funds for it. We just kind of pull your attention to that just because of the size of it. I will say that this Boces has done a very good job of managing this liability. We certainly see this in other districts and other Boces where this is a much larger number, going into tens of millions higher, or even into the $100 million range. So this Boces has done a good job of managing that liability. So that's kind of a quick overview of the statements. Are there any questions on those or on the statements themselves before I get into the internal control communication? Okay. If not, I'll move on to the internal control communication. So what we refer to as your management letter. And these are just really, as a part of our auditing procedures, we're required to look at your system of internal controls, and we do some testing of that and meet with your staff and interview them. And we come up with some recommendations if we see based on what we see. And again, as I mentioned, one of those items was the adult and continuing ed. So some of the programs are running deficits, and I know you're monitoring those, but continue to monitor those and look for opportunities to improve the bottom of how those are operating. There's another item, current year procurement procedures. So we had some instances of some purchases that were above the quoting thresholds, but didn't see the correct number of quotes. So, just continue to make all efforts to comply with your purchasing procurement policies. And I know Melanie is drafting responses, corrective actions to this, and here it is.
Yep, that's what you see right now is the proposed response.
Right. So you can see we're already you're already beginning to address these, which is very positive. A couple of other items which we're just kind of talking to boards about. Federal programs. So there's a big push at the state level to say that you should have these written manuals talking about your federal programs. So Boces get some money from federal grants. And under the guidance and compliance requirements for those grants, you're really supposed to have a good system of internal controls set up to address those compliance requirements, which this Boces does have, and you do have those policies in place that you're supposed to have. But the state is recommending that you have a written manual that really outlines what those controls are and how they operate. So we're recommending that you have that put together, and I know you do have a template to start working on that, so that will be addressed. GASB Statement 84, again, this is Governmental Accounting Standards Boards, and it just addresses how certain items in your financial statements will be are reported, how they're currently reported versus how they will be reported moving forward. We will be working with Melanie and Kelly on what you have in your agency funds and where those maybe more properly should be reported. And we'll be doing that in the next year. Okay, a couple of prior year recommendations where we saw improvements. So just very happy to report that we did see deposits in the adult education programs made in tax. So we didn't have any problems with being able to tie out the deposits from the adult ed and timeliness of those deposits. So we didn't see those coming in late. We saw them on a more regular and more timely basis, which is very positive. So glad to be able to report that. Invoices for adult ed are being run through the receivable module WinCap. So it's a great way of being able to control and track those. And timesheets for adult ed reviewed for clerical accuracy and approved prior to being processed. So that's a real important and good control. And we're glad to see that implemented. Okay. Whew.
Any questions from anyone? I have Kelly Von Kramer, our treasurer. She's on the Zoom meeting this evening as well. So she's here to answer any questions, but also I have to say Kelly's done an amazing job with COVID and everything going on with state aid and the districts having their financial difficulties coming. Kelly's been preparing cash flow statements and watching those cash flow statements with a very critical eye. And I have to thank you. I have to thank her for that. She's also in the midst of all of this, continuing to work with 3+1, who many of you are probably familiar with. We had them help the Boces try to increase some of our interest income. And even with, interest rates going as low as they are, Kelly continues to work with them to achieve the greatest interest income that we can. And they negotiate with our banks to give us the best rate possible. So I have to publicly thank Kelly for, continuing to do all of her work, which is an abundant amount of work, plus, taking those things on as well. And many others that I haven't even mentioned here this evening. So
thank you, Melanie. Having a supportive administration helps. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, John.
So if there aren't any other questions, the audit report will be presented to the Board of Education in the meeting following this. John will come on. He will do a higher level summary of this, but we ask that, perhaps one of the audit committee members makes a motion to accept that this evening. It is on the agenda for this evening.
Okay.
Okay.
Mhm.
So John, I think you can stay on if you'd like, but if you want to get a couple things done between now and 7 p.m., we won't take any offense to that. So if you'd like to exit the meeting, feel free, and we'll see you soon.
All right, I'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
So switching gears to our second agenda item here, and I will share my screen again. These are the claims audit exception reports. This is for the period of July 1 to September 30th. And this first page here is for the general fund. We had, let's see here, 857 checks were issued, and we had about 11 items that our internal claims auditor found. A few with no shipping on the PO, so she spoke to the clerk. We had a couple address changes on those as well. There were a few of those. That seemed to be the theme.
Melanie, can you make that bigger so we can see?
Oh, sure, yeah. Is that better?
Yeah,
Sorry,
it's okay.
I don't know how. It's difficult with this because you don't know how different people are seeing it. So, yeah, please speak up if you can't see it, and I'll adjust it. And then on our special aid fund, we had one item, and that check was avoided. It seemed to be a duplicate. So out of 168, there was one there in the special aid fund. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Well, it looks pretty good.
Yeah, I'm very, very pleased. The business office, has been working hard, and even with COVID going on, and when we were somewhat working in and out of the office, nobody skipped a beat. It just kept on functioning. So
Yeah, I was going to add too, thanks to Melanie and Kelly, in terms of, you got about 160 million going through that office. We didn't speak about the consortiums, the health consortium and the workers' comp consortium, but a lot of money passes through there. And the accountability is great. I know certain people want to attack the administration, but financially, I think we're a rock star in terms of that. We're a good model. And I know the districts, Melanie helps the districts a lot. And being able to give back money at the right time in December, it really helps the local districts. It's going to become even more critical when the state announces they don't have any money in a couple of weeks. So nice job to everybody.
Is that when the money goes back?
The refund goes back in December.
Yeah, generally the first Friday, I think we try to aim for.
And we'll be giving you a printout district by district. So if you go back to your board.
Just going
meeting,
to ask, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we like to give that report. We also give it to the superintendent so they know. And that's money they can use to help close gaps and stuff. And they also see the more services they buy from Boces, the bigger the refund back. I think Niagara Falls is getting back over $1 million, so they really need that.
Wow.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's coming at a critical time for everybody.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll talk later on about the issues in terms of what's going to happen this year if we have to go out.
Okay. Are there any other questions regarding the claims audit exception report?
The only question I got, no, that one? Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Any other questions for the committee? Okay.
I seen that previously they had the adult continuing that. He had to think about monitoring it. What is the status, sir?
Yes, so that's our adult ed program that is run separately. It's not run through our general fund. And so that's like our adult ed nursing, our adult skills such as HVAC, welding, those types of things, as well as our literacy programs that Sue Deemert runs in the high school equivalencies. So the recommendation is because some of those programs have been experiencing some losses. They want us to continue to monitor that. We've taken some proactive measures over the past couple of years. One being, for example, in our nursing program, we need to make sure that we have a particular number of students entering into the program to cover the costs, because unfortunately it's a very rigorous program. It is very difficult, and for various reasons, the 30 to 35 folks that start the cohort don't always finish. So we lose that revenue as the cohort progresses, and that's where we run into issues of not being able to sometimes cover our costs. So we need to make sure that we're starting these programs with an adequate number of enrollments.
I see. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. Well, we will adjourn the audit committee. There is a separate login for the Board of Education meeting at 7 p.m. and you should have all received that. So we will adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.